So I didn't know much about the sound art and experimental music scene here in Taiwan, and I still don't. But having this conversation with Ron Hanson of the publication White Fungus about Liquid Architecture's tour of Taiwan named Entering Tone was really illuminating. Liquid Architecture is an Australian organization for artists working with sound art and experimental music. They're coming to Taiwan November 23rd to December 2nd of 2017. You've been following the sound scene here in Taiwan for a while now. For White Fungus, the magazine that you co-founded, Liquid Architecture first came to Taiwan in 2016 on a research trip, with their curiosity piqued in part by an article you wrote on the sound scene here. What did they see in the music scene here that spurred them to come back a year later?
I think that they're seeing a lot of fresh energy in Taiwan, a growing audience, a growing sophistication in the level of work that's being produced here, and they were just really turned on by it, and they thought this is something we want to connect to and to engage with. So it's quite significant that they've decided to do their first ever tour outside of Australia in Taiwan.
This is their first ever tour outside of Australia.
Yeah, they've done some events in Singapore before, but this is their first proper tour. I mean, these guys have been going for 18 years. They're very established in Australia, and they're known around the world in the sound art community. But this is the first time they've done a fully fledged tour outside of Australia, so it's quite significant that they've decided that Taiwan is fertile ground for this kind of an endeavor.
What is the worldwide overview of sound art and experimental music? Is there a country that is seen as the preeminent spot for it?
Well, I mean, traditionally, the main centers for sound art have been places like New York, Berlin, and London, and these cities are still, they still hold sway. But it's been something that's really been building up and gaining a lot more recognition, especially over the last sort of 17, 18, 20 years. Since the turn of the millennium, really. But in Taiwan, there's been a huge amount of growth. It's been building up since the mid-1990s and is starting to reach a point where people around the world are becoming interested in Taiwanese sound and Taiwanese experimental music, and there's a growing recognition, and there are more and more opportunities for Taiwanese artists to present their work around the world because of this.
What are some ways the sound scene in Taiwan is distinct or different from the scenes in other countries? Like, is there a distinctly Taiwanese sound in its attitude or otherwise?
Well, I think one thing, because, we present a lot of Taiwanese artists, both in Taiwan and around the world, and one thing I've noticed is that with a lot of Taiwanese sound artists, there's a real visual component, a real performance component. The artists here are very good at performing physically, and often they work in stuff like video work or light work, performance art, other areas. There's a real ability to really improvise and mix in all sorts of different kinds of things. There's not a strict school of Taiwanese sound art, partly because there's a real DIY approach and a real, it's not as institutionalized as in some places. People are really making it up as they go along. So there's a freshness, but I've really noticed a strong visual and a performance component that makes it quite distinct in a live setting.
Okay, so how would you categorize the momentum of the sound scene here? Would you say it's on the rise, and Liquid Architecture's tour here is a sign of that, or has it plateaued, and this Liquid Architecture tour is a welcome jolt for the sound scene here, or has it been declining since the 1990s?
I think it's strong momentum. I mean, just for myself, it seems every weekend I go out in Taipei or somewhere in Taiwan and discover a new young artist whom I hadn't heard of before. There's more and more artists, more people organizing events. Now, I should mention that recently Liquid Architecture presented two Taiwanese artists in Australia. Those artists are Lin Chi Wei and Wong Fu Rei. Now, these guys are two of the pioneers of the scene, and their work's being presented all over the world. I mean, Lin Chi Wei had his tape work project performed at the Tate Modern in London, which is, one of the most prestigious art museums in the world. So it's really building and building, and I think that, it's only going to grow further from here. Recently in London, there was a night of experimental Taiwanese music at Cafe Otto, which is one of the hot spots in the world for this kind of work. And there was a radio special on resonance FM about Taiwanese experimental music. So we're just seeing more and more interest, and I don't think we've reached the peak yet. I'm quite excited about where this is heading over the next few years.
Where would Taiwan rank in terms of Asian countries in the sound art scene?
Well, in terms of the history, Japan has had the strongest sound art scene. It's, particularly in the 90s, Japanese noise became a huge phenomenon and still is, starting in the 90s, and there's a lot of established, very sophisticated artists here. There was quite a lot of stuff coming out of China, but I really think that Taiwan is starting to distinguish itself as one of the most exciting places. Even in Japan, it's quite established, but there's not as much fresh blood, perhaps, as there is in Taiwan, and it's starting to really differentiate itself as perhaps one of the hottest spots in Asia for sound. And the fact that Liquid Architecture have decided to come here is really an indication of that.
So let's talk about the events going on with Liquid Architecture. There will be events in Tainan, Taichung, and Taipei, ranging from performances and concerts, like the event Sublate on December 2nd at Corner here in Taipei, and more educational collaborative events like the symposium titled Practicing Sound, Individually and Collectively, being held in Taichung's National Taiwan Museum of Fine Arts. Could you give us a taste of some of the topics and themes being explored in these events?
Yeah, well, there's quite a range of different stuff. In Tainan, there's a venue called Ting Shuo, which is started by the Taiwanese artist Alice Hui Shang and her partner Nigel Brown. They both studied on Australia, and they've moved here and started this venue, and they tend to be more with improvisation, more vocal techniques and sort of analog kind of performances, whereas we're holding a big event at the Dance Club Corner in Taipei, which is more focused on electronic music and more closely related to techno music. And then there's going to be talks, and and then Betty Apple has organised a listening session utilising hot springs in Tainan. So it's quite a range of different stuff. I should also mention that we've produced a new publication, which is bilingual, Chinese and English, which is detailing a lot of the different artists and things that are going on here in Taiwan. So if you check out the Liquid Architecture website, they've got the full program there, but there's really an impressive range of activities and different ways of being able to engage with them and the different artists involved in this project.
What's the new publication's name that you just mentioned?
Well, the new publication is called Entering Tone, which is also the name of the tour itself. It's a little over 100 pages, and there's an article about the Taiwanese sound artist Hong Kai Wong, also an article about the Taipei artist Betty Apple, who was recently in Mexico City on a residency and producing work over in Mexico. And there's an article about the independent art space in Taipei, Acid House, plus lots of information about different artists. There's an interview with Liquid Architecture and an introductory essay from them. So it's a pretty interesting overview of this project, and I think hopefully will help to grow the audience for this work in Taiwan, as well as allow people outside of Taiwan to get more of a glimpse of what's going on here.
So what would you tell somebody who is interested in learning more about sound art and experimental music here in Taiwan? Of course, they should read your magazine, White Fungus, and other publications. But other than that, where should they go? What type of publications they should start reading? So on, etc.
Well, there's a lot of different people organizing stuff. Lacking Sound Festival is very established, and they organize regular events, and they bring international artists. So check out Lacking Sound Festival. In recent years, Lonely God Records is a very exciting group of young artists here, and they do recordings and organize events. Lonely God. Candela Records has been very important. They're a little bit quiet at the moment, but they have been a real force in Taiwan. So these are good places to start. The Cube space in Taipei is a project space that involves a lot of visual art, but they're very involved in in sound. So, and of course, Tingshuo, as I mentioned, in Tainan is a really exciting place and is starting to activate the scene down in Tainan. So I would suggest, checking out these people's, Facebook pages, social media, websites, and getting along to the events. It's the best place to meet people and really experience the music firsthand.
And last question, what is an upcoming big event or big development in the sound community here in Taiwan? Is there something that's coming up that people can go to or get involved in?
Well, we're holding the final event of this Liquid Architecture tour on December 2 at Corner, and it's going to involve 3 Australian artists, Jana Quill, Rainbow Chan, and Andrew McFarlane, and it's also going to have 10 different Taiwanese acts. So on one night, you'll get a chance to experience a lot of different Taiwanese artists, and we're selling tickets to this event. The tickets include a free copy of the new publication. So if you get a ticket and get this publication, then that's going to give you a pretty good introduction to a lot of what's going on here.
All right. Thank you, Ron. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex.
That was my conversation with Ron Hanson, the co-founder of the publication White Fungus. We'll close this podcast with a song by musician Lu Jiachi, someone who Ron recommended when I asked him for some music samples. Thanks for listening to Taiwan Talk. I'm your host, Alex Lewis. Talk again soon.